America during the 1950s was full of growth and change. Women's roles revolutionized, new inventions were discovered, yet at the same time, racial tensions were getting worse and worse. Anti-slavery whites and African Americans believed that the Emancipation Proclamation during the Civil War would end slavery and encourage equality for all races. Unfortunately, this assumption was incorrect. Many Southern states continued to do whatever they could to disenfranchise Black people, for example, by implementing their hateful views into Southern legislature. Many Southern courts believed that government could not control private individuals over matters of race, so the federal government could not force a shop or bar owner to desegregate.
This helped to establish the principle of separate but equal, which was upheld by later court rulings in cases such as Plessy versus Ferguson. After the separate but equal doctrine, America began to see the spread of what were known as Jim Crow laws, which continued racial segregation in public facilities.
To combat these views, in 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court put down the separate but equal doctrine that allowed forms of discrimination. Activists began to protest against public segregation and fought for equal rights for African Americans and white people. Historical figures such as Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks greatly contributed to this enlightenment during the civil rights movement. They led others to join them in nonviolent forms of protest for equality. Their efforts began to pay off, and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments passed in the late 1860s legally put an end to slavery. Also, these amendments declared that every African American born in the U.S. was a U.S. citizen, and allowed all African Americans to vote. Yet, this voting right was still challenged by poll taxes and literacy tests. But African Americans pressed on, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, was created in 1964 to enforce laws prohibiting discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, or age in hiring, promoting, firing, setting wages, testing, training, and all other terms and conditions of employment. The Civil Rights Act took a large step in ensuring that special treatment was not given to a person of a specific race. Section 703A made it unlawful for an employer to fail or refuse to hire or to discharge any individual,
or otherwise to discriminate against any individual with respect to his compensation, terms, conditions, or privileges or employment because of such individual's race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. The Civil Rights Act led to increased focus on other issues, and new protests over the desegregation of public facilities, such as schools. Brown v. Board of Education, a case that was given the name to include 5 separate U.S. Supreme Court cases, were all concerned over the segregation in schools. The case declared that establishing separate public schools based on race was unconstitutional. This frightened the South, as their white supremacist culture was being threatened by encouraged diversification, and they scrambled to find ways to undermine the ruling. During the late 1950s, public schools began to think about desegregation and integration in the school districts, as pressured by Brown v. Board to do so quickly. The NAACP, also known as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, emerged as a strong supporter of desegregated schools. The organization helped to integrate schools all over America, and is known most strongly for its influence and involvement in the southern state of Arkansas, or more specifically in the city of Little Rock. Central High School, located in Little Rock, an all-white public high school, was off-limits for black students even after Brown v. Board. Governor Orville Faubus opposed desegregation of his schools and warned against it. To satisfy Brown v. Board's urgent call for desegregation, Arkansas's school officials created a system in which African American students interested in enrollment into all-white schools had to go through multiple interviews to decide if they were eligible to be admitted, a process which made desegregation slow and ineffective.
In Little Rock, out of 80 students interviewed, only 9 were assumed qualified. Those 9 students were Melba Patillo Beals, Elizabeth Eckford, Ernest Green, Gloria Ray Carlmark, Carlotha Alls Lanier, Terrence Roberts, Jefferson Thomas, Minijan Brown Trickley, and Thelma Mothershed Ware, and were later known to form the infamous group Little Rock Nine. The Little Rock Nine called national attention to racist Southern culture, changed history, and provided hope for the future of equality among races by integrating themselves into an all-white school. Daisy Bates, a newspaper columnist and NAACP leader, played a huge role in recruiting the Little Rock Nine in the summer of 1957. On September 2, 1957, Governor Orville Faubus announced that he would call in the Arkansas National Guard to prevent the African American students' entry to Central High. He claimed that this action was for the own students' protection. In a televised address, Faubus insisted that violence and bloodshed might break out if black students were allowed to enter the school. Following day, the Mothers League held a sunrise service at the school as a protest against gradual integration. That same day, federal judge Richard Davises issued a ruling that desegregation would continue as planned the next day. As the federal and state government continued to argue over the matter, 8 of the Little Rock Nine pressed on and arrived at Central High School to be enrolled on September 4, 1957 for their first day of school. 8 arrived together, driven by Bates. Eckford's family, however, did not have a telephone, and Bates could not reach her to let her know the carpool plans. Therefore, Eckford arrived alone. Upon arrival at the school, they were greeted by angry throngs of students and parents protesting their entry. The angry mob yelled horrid insults such as 2468, we don't want to integrate, waving signs accusing them of communism, atheism, and genocide.
The question I usually get asked is, were we scared? I think initially we didn't anticipate clearly all of the violence and turmoil that occurred. The first day that we attempted to go to school, 8 of us were at one part of the school and Elizabeth Eckford was at another part. And it was the mob that followed Elizabeth. Then you begin to feel that this was a very hostile, violent group of people. Even at that point, I told myself if we didn't go through with it, didn't attend Central and backed out, it would just reinforce the view that the African American community in Little Rock wasn't interested in making a change in things.
The psychology behind the crisis was fighting. The integration made them hopeful for the future, although they were damaged psychologically by the names and abuse they had to endure. The crowd spat on them and physically blocked them from entering. Not only did the protesters prevent the students from entering, but the Arkansas National Guard, sent by Governor Faubus, with orders to surround the building and prevent the students from entering. Armed troops preventing black students from going to the school made a huge scene and appeared in international news. After hearing the news, Eisenhower met with Faubus, warning him to stop impeding justice. When Faubus refused to back down, President Eisenhower was infuriated and removed the Arkansas National Guard from state control and called in 1,000 federal troops from the 101st Airborne Division to Little Rock for the protection of the 9 African American students, making him the first president to ever call in federal troops for the protection of African Americans and their rights. The students had an extremely rough time at the school and were subject to mass amounts of bullying and demonstrations of hatred.
Came here today, he says, to apologize to Minnie Jean for an altercation in the cafeteria. What happened?
Oh, I just went in the cafeteria and I'd sort of been dared by other kids, to retaliate for Minnie Jean for having poured chili on someone's head earlier, and so I did it, but it was not done out of hate.
What was it done out of?
It was just done out of ignorance, of not understanding her plight. And or the plight of all of them.
The troops escorted the students through the mob on their first day of school on September 25th, 3 weeks after the school opened, and continued to do so thereafter each and every day. All of the students were harassed daily, and Ernest Green was the only one of the 9 to graduate from Central High School. These 9 courageous students made history and changed America. The crisis in Little Rock called national attention to desegregation of schools, and the students made themselves well known for their service to the efforts for equality. Each student grew up and made a life for themselves after being a part of the Little Rock Nine. Elizabeth Eckford joined the Army. Green served as a secretary of the Federal Department of Labor under President Jimmy Carter. Brown worked as a deputy in the workforce, and Patillo was a reporter for NBC.
All of the Little Rock Nine served as important historical figures of the civil rights and were each rewarded.
1958, a year after the integration of Central High School, Governor Orville decided to close all public high schools in Little Rock due to the integration. All students of the Little Rock Nine finished their education elsewhere around the country. Little Rock high schools reopened August 1959. Little Rock Nine received the Congressional Medal of Honor in 1998, and their bravery continues to amaze us today.